Today, we are talking mermaids, and specifically, not everyone's favorite H2O, but H2O's younger sister, Mako Mermaids. Now, I know some people, and it makes sense because it's a spin off, it's like a decade later. Not everybody wants to jump on Mako Mermaids, and I hear everybody because H2O obviously always superior. But I have watched Mako Mermaids a couple times now, just did a rewatch, which is why we're here today. And honestly, it's fun, okay? But specifically, I want to talk today about patriarchy, okay, in the mermaid world, okay? Because this is something very interesting, and I actually do want to do a rewatch of H2O to see how this may tie into H2O as well, in a similar way, and we'll briefly touch on that later. But when we talk about Mako Mermaids, the difference between H2O Mako Mermaids. H2O, three girls who were land girls essentially, right? In the right place, the right time, become mermaids in the Mako pool. Okay? We know that. In Mako Mermaids, okay, there is pods, okay? Like a school of fish, right? Pods, mermaid pods, okay? So there are, born mermaids, okay? And a land boy named Zach, okay? Right place, right time, first merman there has been in forever. We are noting this is the first mermaid. So the mermaids are realizing a merman was made. So the difference with Zach in particular, we're going to kind of spoil this if you have not already seen Mako Mermaids. I'm going to spoil a little bit because we have to. Yes, Zach did go into the moon pool, became a merman, but he was actually always destined to be a merman, because he always was one. Okay, like if you have seen the decom, the 13th year, similar vibes there, right? Like he has a mermaid mother. He didn't know that. He didn't know that because his parents are regular people, right? Later on, we find this out in the series. But when Zach falls into the moon pool, becomes a merman, these mermaids are freaking out. Why? Because he is the first merman in a long ass time. Okay, I know what you're asking. How can there be so many mermaids, but there are no mermen? How do they reproduce? Okay, sometimes you just gotta chalk it up to like, it's a fantasy world. We're not gonna have some answers, okay? However, I did look this up to see if we get this answer to Mako Mermaids. And I am going off of the basis of I watched the show a couple of times and the wiki for Mako Mermaids, mind you. So if you have any corrections, feel free to share them with me. However, according to the wiki, it is that new mermaids can be created using the magic of the moon pool. That is something we know about. Whether you watch H2O or Mako Mermaids, the moon pool is where the magic is at to make hatchlings. Okay? So honestly, kind of sick. They can just wait, this is like it's kind of cool. They can just make new mermaids and they don't need a man to reproduce. They can just reproduce using the magic of the moon pool, which honestly, like I said, kind of cool. Kind of cool. So that kind of answers our questions. Like there's always new mermaids over the span of time, but where are the mermen, right? Now, to go back to what I was saying about the point of this video, we're talking about patriarchy in Mako Mermaids because these are the things that I love to find ways to talk about them through the lens of my favorite TV shows, okay? And because you will always see stuff like this, whether in a big way or a small way, in whatever you're watching, because that is just the nature of things that come out in shows, because we are all people and have our own biases and experiences that come out through the writing and just storytelling in general. Like it's gonna be there. You can surely find something, a little nugget in anything that you watch. Now, the mermen, okay, are not in Mako, right? These are just pods of mermaids, and they freak out when the first merman in a long ass time came along, right? And obviously they assume it's a land boy, but either or, I would say arguing, knowing once they know that Zach is actually an actual merman, like he was born a merman and then was granted or put a spell on to have regular human legs, so he didn't realize till later that he was a inauthentic merman. until he fell into the moon pool, right? It almost threatens them more, right? Because it's more serious for them. So you have to ask yourselves, how did we get to a point where we only have mermaids? And that is because back in the day, there was a war between the mermaids and the mermen from Mako Island, okay? Because if you remember anything about mermaids, your first introduction to mermaids may have been The Little Mermaid, right? We remember Ariel's father, right, has a Triton. He rules the sea. Right now, unfortunately, what so often knowing the things you do about history, knowing the things you know about men, what do you think happened to for us to get to a point where now there are no mermen? What do you think might have happened? Is that they wanted to take over Mako Island and they were being very disruptive and destroying a lot of shit and trying to have all the power. Tale as old as time, tale as old as time. Okay, so let me take you through what the Mako Mermaids wiki specifically says. So, Mako Mermaids basically states that because there was this war, the mermaids they called on everybody, okay, from sea to shining sea, okay, to defend Mako Island, all right, because the men were doing too much in a destructive way, quite honestly. Till as old as time, as I've said, and they defended their spot and they fucking won. Where did the mermen go, though? Where did the mermen go? Allegedly, they were all gone to the land. If mermen exist in the sea, they're not running into them for whatever reason. But it's allegedly said that everyone was like cast a leg spell of some sort, obviously to make them be human, be able to walk on land, and they are just thrown into foster families and such. Very interesting, very interesting. And we don't in Mako Mermaids, obviously, there's only so much we can touch on, and even now we're kind of going into deeper than the show even gets into it. Um, how many mermen exist? That is I would love to know a number on that. That would be interesting to find out for sure. That's not something we have an answer to. So as I've said, you remember Ariel's father, Trident. Trident rules over the mermaids to drain their powers. Okay, thank you. Note that you probably knew that already from mermaid lore, from what you have been exposed to as a child. Okay, now in Mako Mermaids, Zach, listen, as any boy would be, and any merman would be, right? Obviously, he's a little cocky at first, right? Like, he's a little like, I don't know, like, I think there's a struggle to trust between the mermaids and the merman anyway, because it seems so far fetched, but he is a merman, and he's like, I don't know, like, I think I'm just gonna go get the trident, right? Like, surely, how bad could it be, right? How bad could it be? I get the trident, and what? Like, nothing bad's gonna happen. It's just gonna be cool. Now, like I said, because Zach doesn't realize, it's not that just he's a merman, right? It's almost that the trident gives him more power because he is not just a merman, an actual merman. It is because he is a descendant of people who are royals, okay, in the mermaid world, okay? So it almost gives him more power, right? It is almost like quote unquote his destiny. Not in a way that like he should wield it, but just in a way that like it would have been calling to him. It makes him more powerful, could make him more threatening, right? If used in the wrong sense. What we learn, and as it's important to say, Zach was a real merman, although he didn't know that at first, is that there is a season where they go get the trident. Um, Obviously, the magic was harming the mermaids. They destroy the trident, and the stone that has all the power was set aside, hopefully to not be seen again. We don't know where they hide it until there is a merman chamber. Okay, this is what we find about the history of the merman chamber later on in the story. During this time, an unnamed merman, Zach and Mimi's ancestor, okay, I forgot to mention this. Zach actually realizes in the same season he has a sister, and it is Mimi, one of the Mako Mermaids girls, and they actually realize that like they are brother and sister. They are from the same mermaid, Narissa. Okay, thank you. Let's note that. And they are ancestors, and like she is this big shot in the mermaid world, okay? Built a chamber on the island with the intention of siphoning the island's moon pool's moon water. As we know, the moon pool, charged by the moon, right? Magic, and holds the magic to the Mako pod, right? Which is very interesting. And I think in H2O, and I believe in the third season with Bella, she also said there was a moon pool where she was from. So it implies that the local pods get their magic from their moon pools. Very interesting. I don't know. We don't, like I said, we don't have the full lore on that. It's just one of the things like we're never going to know all of it, but it's very interesting to know. So, what happens? The trident, the power of the merman chamber siphons the pool water, right? And if we do that, right, they are harming the mermaids, right? They are taking the power away, they are hurting them, right? So that means they're gonna die. From what is implied, like if you drain all of their powers, they would die because you need magic to be a mermaid. I think is what is from my understanding. That is what's going on here. The merman falls in love with the mermaid and says, "You know what? We're not going to activate this merman chamber, okay? Because hello, his wife. I was just making up that they're married. I actually don't know, right? Um, falls in love with the mermaid. His wife is a mermaid. Obviously, he's not going to drain the power of the people he loves, right? Now, they are considered to be a royal line of merpeople who ruled the seas and ensured peace between mermen and mermaids after a previous war. What's noted in here, as I've stated earlier in the video, there was war. Mermen, mermaids. Mermaids called the troops, okay, and defeated the mermen from Mako Island. So when did this happen in relative to the merman chamber? I would love to know. I don't know that. So, war going on, mermen had to skedaddle. Okay. Famous royal merpeople have two children. One Mimi left with the mermaids, one merman given up on land. Like I said, the 13th year, like, gave him up to somebody. People protected him. Now, I feel like in the 13th year, which is such a fucking throwback, they were like, "Oh yeah, we did find you on a boat, so I guess that makes sense you were a mermaid." I feel like it was something like that. My memory escapes me. That movie came out in a long time ago, guys. Now, only a member of the merman's bloodline could activate the chamber. No other merman has been able to use it since, and it became a lost ruin. Interesting. Note that. Note that. Because later on, we get a new merman has entered the villa, and that is Eric. Now, eventually, we don't learn that he's a merman right away. Eventually, it's just like, you're suspicious. And I think he's like, wait, you're probably a mermaid. You're probably a merman. I know this about you. And whatever. All is revealed. All is revealed. One of the girls on Dina, she actually ends up dating Eric. And it's very interesting, and we'll get into it later. I think this was like they're kind of mimicking Zane and Ricky, although obviously Zane was a land boy. But they kind of had that like annoying, sarcastic banter, if you will. So I think that is what they were meant to be. Obviously, no one will ever be Zane and Ricky. Zane and Ricky, my favorite, like toxic couple. Also, for those who are watching who have not watched Mako Mermaids and are just listening, Ricky does make an appearance in the last season of Mako Mermaids, and she is still her same old self in the best way. Uh, and so everyone should tune in for that at the very least. Merman pods were disbanded, and then from then on, all mermen were to be given up by their mothers raised on land in human foster families. And obviously, they use the leg spell to make sure that they have legs and can walk on 2 feet. Interesting. Once again, all from the Mako Mermaids wiki page if you would like to fact check. So, how are we getting into patriarchy here? Well, okay, let's think about it. We know that, under patriarchy, these very stereotypical man things, right? Men tend to start the wars and they want power over everybody. And the opposite, what's interesting? The opposite of patriarchy isn't even matriarchy, right? Because they are fundamentally different systems. Where matriarchy places its most vulnerable in the middle and how to meet their needs, patriarchy is like we are the men and we have the hierarchical in this system. So it's very interesting. It's very interesting. And I think people wonder, okay, so we cast away all the men. Wow, love to live there, right? Like we cast away all the men. We're not going to be worried about the mermen anymore. Like they are out of the way. Okay, they're not even maybe in the sea. Like I said, we don't have. I know it said that they are all land boys now, but we don't actually know that for sure. But it's very interesting, right? Because it is this very extreme, like, clearly men cannot be trusted, so we're just gonna put you all the way over there. And you can't blame them. You can't blame them. And this is where the patriarchy comes in, right? Where a lot of men are very sensitive to all men. But until there are men who stand up against it, right? So proudly, right? Up against the patriarchy, right? Like how will anything change? Everybody needs to deconstruct in order to make sustainable change, right? And if men can't even speak out against that shit, how are we going to make things better, right? And the thing about patriarchy, I always say, like, because men may feel under patriarchy that they need to go about things in a certain way, like, they really do rob themselves of, like, relationships they could have. And obviously, everybody works to uphold it, right? It is not just men, it is also, there are many ways women uphold patriarchy as well. But I say this particularly because it's just like, if you actually looked at the effects of patriarchy and what meant, think about it, entitlement, need to have power, need to feel stronger. How do these things lead to things like wars, needing to take power, um, and feeling like they are entitled to something or they know more than other people, know better than other people, in which they take action and it ends up harming more people? Because if you actually just listen to the people who say, hey, if you do this, this will be harmful, and they go, no, 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 surely that's not going to happen, and they don't listen to those people, and then guess what, they do the thing and then people are harmed. Interesting to know. See, this is why I love this. When I rewatched this, I was like, this was a sick storyline. I really enjoyed the storyline because I was like, it really made me think. It really made me think. And you forget that some shows, like this is a kid's show technically, right? Like they will have you be thinking. They will have you be thinking. It's so funny the way that we could put these little things into shows, and storylines like that we can really elaborate on in the real world. But the thing about Eric, and he is the merman in this situation, right? Is that he learns about a merman chamber. Okay, he has heard obviously whisperings of it, but didn't know if it was real. Obviously, is shown this merman chamber, and he is like, honestly, why don't we activate it? Right now, Eric eventually learns that Zach is the only one who can activate it because of just his ancestor, who his ancestors are, right? So he eventually, now, one thing I talked about earlier, they buried a trident and the stone they hid. Where were they hiding it? The mermaids were actually hiding it in their grotto, okay? Because there's a principal. She is a mermaid as well, but she lives on land, and she kind of took the Mako girls in this situation, and they decided to hide the stone there. Now, when Zach touches the stone, it obviously he has the power. He's destined. He's part of the bloodline that can activate the stone, and really, the power is in the stone at the end of the day. So, if he brings the stone to the merman, watch me struggle saying merman throughout this entire video. If he brings a stone to the merman chamber at the right time, full moon, okay, like you're a werewolf, it's always the full moon. It's always the full moon in these situations, right? He could activate, technically, the merman chamber. Eric wants to steal the stone, right? And eventually learns that, like, he can basically grab Zach's power through the stone, to imitate him, essentially, to be able to get into the merman chamber, and he could therefore activate the merman chamber once he's stolen Zach's powers, is what we learn and what happens in the show. So when we think about patriarchy tying into this particularly, something is interesting. And like I was talking about patriarchy, right? Like it is everyone's work to deconstruct that, to work towards that, breaking free of the patriarchy, right? Because that helps absolutely no one, right? And it does, although it does benefit some people, it does ultimately technically harm everyone at the end of the day, right? There is this kind of idea that there will always be temptations, whether to be, for example, High School Musical, to fall back into the status quo. Or, for example, in this case, it was technically because the chamber was made by his ancestor, Zach's ancestor, like he would feel called to it. He would he give into the temptation to open it, right? Zach is not exempt from that, but I will say, like I said, when we start off the show and Zach is learning about being a merman, right? There is kind of like this like very boy cockiness, like, maybe I am just gonna do the thing. Like, surely, like, how bad could it be, right? To it. And the thing about Zach is like Zach, yes, obviously it's part of the storyline. He does like question, like, should I do this? But at the end of the day, Zach is a good guy. Zach is a good guy and he's gonna do the right thing at the end of the day, although like he is, he faces the temptation as well, right? It's different than Eric, but it's temptation nonetheless. And Zach is someone who's like, no, like actually this is not a good idea. Here's what we need to do. Although, like I said, simultaneously being tempted by it and being open about the fact, like, listen, like it is kind of scary because I am tempted by it, right? And I know this isn't the right thing to do. So it's interesting to know, and where I say patriarchy in the real world ties into this is because, unless you are someone who can stand proudly against it and then do the right thing, despite maybe having all these other men or people in general telling you don't do that, refusal to stand up and do what's right for whatever reason is kind of like the reason we keep part of the reason, not the only, perpetuating these things, right? Until we are to be like, no, actually, no, actually, no, we have to say no, we have to say no, right? It's interesting. And I bring Eric into this because, like I said, he wanted to open the merman chamber. And why did he want to open the chamber? Eric wanted to release its full potential. Again, reading from the Mako wiki, believing it could add to the power between mermen and mermaids, and use the Trident Stone, as I said, to steal Zach's power when he refused to do it. Now, now, this is an interesting case within patriarchy, I was saying, is men not taking women's concerns or even just other people's concerns into account when we have a big thing, right? We know the history, and we know that, like, when we get to a point where the mermaids have just like said no, no more merman in my area, okay, y'all gotta go on land or something because you're doing too much in a way that is like actually scary and harmful to everyone here, like, right, like we've essentially cast the man away in one word or another, right? So it's understandable that these mermaids are skeptic to men. And I actually think I was going to get into this, but I got sidetracked. Tales all this time. With me personally, is that, for example, when they don't like to say all men, but unfortunately, so many men are doing the wrong thing. So then it's like, okay, like obviously I'm not going to trust everyone because time and time again, look at this. The men almost ruined uh mermaids, right? So like it's understandable they're going to be skeptical of mermen, right? It's just interesting to think about because it's like, well, this is the shit they be doing. This is the shit they be doing. Unfortunately, that's the truth. Right? And so Eric, he is not taking into account, right, anyone's concerns, not even Zach's concerns, right? He's just like, how do you know that? You don't know. Like, and Eric is kind of jealous because the whole thing is like, it's technically Zach's destiny, right? Like, he's technically the only one who can open it. But he's like, who's to say? Like, you don't speak for all mermen. Like, maybe this is actually going to do something good, right? Even though we have all the context to know, I don't think that's going to happen because why would my ancestor have said no to activating this chamber at the end of the day if it was actually good, right? If it could actually unite us in the way and your hypothesis is stating, why wouldn't they do it, right? Like, and Eric was critical of like, whatever, like maybe he just didn't know, whatever. It's just like, no, no, I'm sorry because you have to. And not even that, because he was with Andina, mind you, and Andina was like, no, do not open the chamber. It will not go well. Like, I know you think that it's magically going to be good and maybe it's going to unite us, but it's not going to go well. And Eric was 100% in the wrong because guess what? He's able to activate the chamber. Boom! The mermaids are dying because their powers are being drained. Okay, Zach is able to step in and stop it and save the day, and we're good. Okay, but it's just the whole thing is like, we knew what was gonna happen. We warned you. You did it anyway. The result was what we thought exactly was gonna happen, and now someone had to save the day. And at the end, which is funny, Dina was dating Eric. Eric is like, damn, I really miscalculated here. Could you forgive me? Like, so, like we could still be together. And she's like, no. Like, she's like, no, like you literally disrespected me. I literally warned you. You did not give a fuck about what I said. Bye bye. Like, and honestly, Andina was a queen from that. When she walked away from Eric, I was like, hell yeah. Hell yeah. Sorry. You were wrong. No, I'm not taking you back. And this is interesting, as I've stated in patriarchy. Like, people's concerns are not taken seriously and they go do the thing. They fuck around and find out. And it's like, oh yeah, we actually told you that. We actually warned you that was gonna happen. But they feel, and also like this need to fill this ego. Like, you are not the only one who speaks for Merman, Zach. So Eric, maybe I'm right. Maybe this will actually unite us all. Very interesting, nonetheless. And I just find that this is like such a little fun and interesting storyline in Mako Mermaids that touches on this. Obviously, they don't specifically speak about these things in the show, but just for us to branch off in this conversation about. Also, in Mako Mermaids, Zach has a land boyfriend named Cam, and obviously, Cam is entrusted with the secret that Zach is, in fact, a merman. And what's interesting here is that Cam is low key kind of jealous. I think he's like, thinks it's cool. And once we get to the point where like the main friendship circle, right? Not just like the people who are mermaids, but like their friends outside of there, all finally know the mermaid secret. Like, Cam's like, everyone is gonna think they're cool. Like, right? Like, he maybe feels like an outsider to a degree because he's like, wow, I kind of wish I could do that. Right? And he low key is like sometimes being evil just because he kind of wants to be a mermaid, right? And Eric even tries to get Cam to steal the stone and give to him because he's like, well, I can make you a mermaid. And actually, when Zach had the trident, he actually stopped Cam from being a mermaid, and that destroyed the trident. So that's actually very interesting. A couple instances where Cam really wanted to be a mermaid, and that had to be stopped. That had to be stopped. And interesting, Cam actually dates a different girl named Carly, land girl for reference. And he's like, but wouldn't it be cool if I could be a merman? Like, wouldn't you like me more? And she's like, no, I kind of just like you the way you are. I wouldn't want you to be a merman. And then all of a sudden he's like, oh, okay, I guess I'm going to do the right thing now. I guess I won't give the stone to Eric so he can activate the chamber. Like, it's just so funny because it's like, but you know what I mean? It's like this weird ego thing and being left out and wanting to be seen cool that he like almost makes the wrong choice or does make the wrong choice in some instances, right? Like, it is so interesting to watch this go along. So, we have spoken about the details of Mako Mermaids and how the patriarchy intertwines into the story in the plot line of the Trident and the Merman Chamber. My god, why can't I say merman? Mermen? Merman? It's so bad, guys. Like, what the hell is happening? We have spoken about that. We need to touch on the whole part where mermaids just get to do their mermaid thing and mermen, they're like, we're not commingling at this point, right? Allegedly, all the mermen have sent off to be land boys, essentially. And this is very interesting. Like I said, very cool that the mermaids don't need men to reproduce. They can just use the moon pool water to make new hatchlings. Interesting. Very cool. But I think something, that we learn here, right, is that the mermaids, and there are through Mako Mermaids, like each season, a new girl keeps being cut out, and there's like new characters, and by the end, like the OG girl wasn't even there. So something to note about Mako Mermaids is, we see when Zach first turns into a mermaid, right? Because I can't say merman to save my life. I'm just calling him a mermaid because he could be a mermaid too. Interestingly enough, the boy tails are blue and then they have like an orangey fishtail. Same one you see in H2O. You know the color. Interesting because there's obviously this level of distrust when, why would a man be here? Why would a man be here? Right? And because we know the history of how mermen have harmed mermaids, and we really had to call in all the troops from all the seas to fight the merman to protect Mako Island, right? It makes sense for them to be skeptical of men. Like that makes sense 100%. But then it also begs the question, Zach was by no means a terrible person in any way, shape, or form. And at the end of the day, he does do the right thing, right? We get to someone like Eric, who, it's interesting because he was doing really a wrong thing, and there's a lot of patriarchy intertwined into his decision making, okay? But you do think about like he wanted mermen and mermaids, like maybe this would help us all and we'll finally be united. Should we be separated? Interesting question. Should we stay separated? But what do we do to fix that, right? Can the Mako pool make boy hatchlings? Not an answer I have a question to, right? But when we talk about patriarchy, we're talking about socialization, right? Boys do not wake up, wake up. They don't come out the mother's womb, right? And automatically think these things, right? These things are socialized, right? And we see this throughout anything in the world, right? Not just unique to humans, right? In some way, shape, or form, right? But it begs the question, you know, patriarchy is taught, right? All of these things are taught from, being a child, right? And the thing about this is when we still exist in a system that we are simultaneously trying to change. I like to talk about High School Musical. Hopefully, everybody's seen that, right? Why is it difficult to change? How do we get to the opposite? Or maybe it's not even technically the opposite, but like, how do we overturn our programming to make better decisions, right? That are not patriarchal in nature, right? How do we get to that point? Because you're simultaneously trying to be better whilst also, like Zach, facing the temptations that come with that, right? The status quo of High School Musical, which is why I mention it, right? Troy wanted to try out for the musical, but everyone is telling him, no, stick to the status quo. So, like, how do we make effective changes? What are the things that affect us as a group where, like, someone may be progressive, but then may be pushed back? Or maybe even just like men today, right? Like, they may claim to be progressive, but also will sit when someone makes a sexist joke, right? And not say anything and not speak up, right? How do we get to that point? How do we change that? How do we get to a point where mermaids feel like they can trust the men again to commingle once again, right? It's a very interesting thing to speak about because does that kind of get into the bioessentialism of it all? Is an interesting question. If that we believe that we can't have any new mermen because clearly they will be born to be the same way as the mermen who threatened us before. Interesting things to be thinking about in relative to mermaid shows. Like, this is so interesting, and I don't have the answer to all of this, right? Because the mermaids do learn to trust Zach, and they're like, he is a reliable person, right? Yes, sometimes he's tempted, as any of the guys are, because they still exist in their socialization, right? But at the end of the day, they are reliable. Now, if we want to talk about great men in Mako Mermaids, Zach is a great guy. Like, he is one of our main characters, and I like Zach. I think at the end of the day, he always does the right thing. He's not insanely like doing horrendous things either, right? So like, you wouldn't really hate him by any means. Like, but yeah, like maybe sometimes he almost is gonna make the wrong decision. But honestly, I would argue Cam is worse than him, if I'm gonna be honest. Cam is like, well, maybe we'll just do a little evil. Like, honestly, Cam, I'm surprised he didn't have like a huge villain storyline because he seemed like he could be. Like I said, like he wanted to be a merman so bad he almost was gonna make the wrong decision until the girl was like, no, don't become a merman. Like, I like you for you. And he's like, oh, okay, I guess I won't do that then. Like, it is just so interesting. I trust Cam the least out of the men in Mako Mermaids, of the main group of people, right? Now, we talk about David. Now, who remembers the Juice Nut Cafe? Okay, this is essentially the Juice Nut Cafe for Mako Mermaids World. It's called the Ocean Cafe. And David is one of the kids who runs it. And I say kids because the funny thing is they're all in high school, but somehow he's simultaneously running a cafe. Now, first, his brother owns it, right? But David runs the cafe. So, like, I have a lot of questions regarding that. Nevertheless, he is always one of the workers there, and Carly, who I mentioned earlier, who was with Cam, is also a worker who's always there. Now, I mentioned David because Sweetheart, Sweetheart has never harmed a soul in his life, would trust him with my life. David from Mako Mermaids is the best man in the Mako Mermaids universe, right? If I could trust someone to not open the merman chamber, it would be David, right? Because what's really interesting is eventually he does get with one of the mermaids, Serena, and eventually she does come clean, like, hey, I'm a mermaid, right? Because obviously it gets to the point where it's like, why are you always running away? What's happening? Like, you have to tell me your secret, right? It gets to one of those vibes. But she revealed herself as a mermaid, and he was like, that's so cool. Like, right? Like, he was just an all around nice sweetie pie. Okay, so let's just give a round of applause for David from Mako Mermaids, okay? Because he was great. I loved David from Mako Mermaids. Now, if you are watching the video portion of this video, um, this photo card that I have my mic on is a photo card of Shonu from Monsta X, the K-pop group. And honestly, he would look good as a merman. And I know for a fact that Shonu would not try to open the merman chamber, okay? So I don't want to hear nothing about that. I know he wouldn't do it. I know he wouldn't. I just know it in my heart. Shonu would not have opened the merman chamber, possibly threatening the life of mermaids. I just know it. Just wanted to shout him out, to be honest. But something I wanted to know, and it's interesting about the men in these mermaid shows, where I had earlier stated that Ondina and Eric were kind of like, uh, character wise, supposed to, I think, mimic the Ricky and Zayn, if I had to guess. Now, Zayn, he was never a merman in any way, shape, or form. And Zayn, my favorite toxic man is Zayn from H2O. Like, I don't know, like, there's a lot of issues there for sure, but I don't know. I kind of low key liked Ricky and Zayn together, and it wasn't always right. And they really, there was a lot of issues going on there, but I don't know. Something about it was fun. Not that it was good for it to be fun to watch, but I was entertained, right? And I was sat there and I was like, this is fun. This is fun. But I say this in the realm of like similar vibes to Eric. Zayn and Eric really at the end of the day, whilst they're listening to the concerns of their girlfriends, are really just gonna make the final say, despite any concern that anyone may bring up. So that's an interesting intertwined moment there. But this is interesting because mermaids function in a matriarchy. Okay? And matriarchy is not even an opposite of patriarchy, right? Because it would imply who's on top. And matriarchy is not women on top by any means. It is placing the vulnerable in the middle and fitting their needs, right? So matriarchy is not the opposite of patriarchy, right? So now that we know this, it like begs the question. If and this is more interesting because I don't know the ecosystem of mermaids and even how it worked when the mermen and the mermaids were intertwined, right? But wouldn't it imply if the woman raised the men, the mermen, from they were kids, they wouldn't have the socialization of the patriarchy to fall back on, to then be people who would like become like the original mermen who were trying to harm the mermaids, right? It would probably only be in a situation, right? Like, this is the interesting question that I don't have all the answers to by any means. Because this is interesting. And I don't know, I'm sure there are studies on this. So, and it's really hard because I don't think people can. Something that's interesting, something I want to know is that, a lot of people who are boy moms talk about this in the realm of how do we raise our sons to be better, right? While simultaneously understanding they're also existing in this patriarchal world, right? where, it's one thing in the home, but outside of that, you don't have control, right? And we see so often, like if you existed and went to middle school, right? How that socialization, High School Musical, the status quo, at the end of the day will come for everyone in a way like that, right? So, how do you manage both of those things and shoot the other stuff down, right? When you have, because we still live in a patriarchal system, that coming at them as well. So, in the mermaid world, would someone who was raised in a matriarchy, once thrown into maybe, say, let's say a squad of mermen who were patriarchal, how would that affect them? I don't know the answer to that, but that's interesting. But at the end of the day, I feel like we in the Mako universe are maybe getting closer to the uh some sort of treaty, some sort of peace agreement. But I don't feel like it should even be an agreement because you should agree to make peace. You should just be peaceful when you think about it. But maybe we will be getting a world in which mermen and mermaids live together peacefully. But isn't this interesting to think about? Like, right? Like the men had to be cast away because it was that serious, because they could not be trusted. And now we have some men we can trust. What does that mean for the future? Mermaids and mermen. I don't know. I don't have that answer, but it's interesting to think about. And obviously, in the real world, the biggest thing we can take away when we speak about the patriarchy is that it is everyone's job to deconstruct the patriarchy, right? And everybody carries it out in different ways, and we have to kind of be on top of that, right? And when we speak about men in particular, it is so important that they stand against the patriarchy. And even in a time where they feel like all these men are coming at them for not keeping the status quo of it, right? That's even a more important time to stand up for women, right? And until we have that moment where we're standing up for women, we're not letting the ego get the best of us, we don't feel any more entitlement, right? Like, how do we get to that spot in the real world or the mermaid world? I don't know. I don't have that answer. But this is interesting. I wanted to touch on it because that was honestly my favorite thing about Mako Mermaids. I was rewatching the storyline and I was like, wait a second. This is interesting. This is interesting.